Today we're going to be talking about the Reagan Revolution here in class. And I'll be kind of going through the slideshow here, so Mr. Albers will be helping to pause things as we need. Like I said, this section is over 25.1 is called the Reagan Revolution. We're going to talk a little bit today about why it was called the Revolution and what about it was so different from the time period leading up to it. This time period can be referred to as New Conservatism or Neoconservatism. What we see happen after the 60s and 70s have passed, you have a large group of Americans who feel kind of like they've been ignored, feel like their interests, their concerns haven't really been addressed as a whole. Nixon appealed to this group a little bit in 1968 when he referred to what he called the silent majority. And this silent majority has only grown by the 1980s. By the 1980s, we see this group of people who believe that the government's too big. They believe the government is spending too much time in their lives, that the government is too involved in what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. And specifically, they're believing that the government is spending way too much money on different programs. We see through the 60s and 70s especially, the creation of a significant amount of big government programs or bureaucracies created. The start of this big government era can really be traced back to the New Deal of the 1930s, but we see Johnson expand that with his Great Society of the 1960s. We also see, the 70s as we move forward. Jimmy Carter try to expand the size of the government as well. And overall, this group of people, this new conservative or neoconservatism, this movement believes that the government is just frankly too involved in people's lives. To them, the best way for the economy to get fixed was not Ford's strategy to increase interest rates. It wasn't Carter's strategy to increase government spending and decrease taxes, but it was to get the government out of people's way. They felt that the government was really keeping the economy from working its way out. So overall, these neoconservatives wanted to get regulations out of the government so businesses could overall be more profitable. Now, what I would like you to do with someone around you here quick, and Mr. Albers, when I'm done, you can go ahead and just pause this. But what I want you to discuss with someone around you, and I'll say 2 to 3 minutes, and I want you to discuss how involved should the government be in your day-to-day lives. And think about, what sort of actions do you want the government to be involved in? What do you want the government to stay out of? Just overall, what do you think is the role of the government in society today? Now, the other group that kind of ties in with this neoconservative movement, these new Republicans of the 1980s, would be what's also known as the religious right. Now, the religious right would be a group of evangelicals who tie religion to conservatism. So they are looking to tie Christian ideals to the conservative ideology or to the Republican Party. This group of people would have been appalled at the rise of drug usage during the 60s and 70s. And this can kind of be seen in Nancy Reagan's big push as First Lady in the 1980s, the Just Say No campaign to drugs. And if you're someone who watches the Goldbergs at all, you saw that kind of gone through in a previous or recent episode of the Goldbergs as Beverly got pretty involved in the Just Say No campaign. The religious right would have also been very anti-abortion, which is a big part then and still is today a big part of the Republican Party and the Republican Party's ideology. This group of people in the religious right would have also rejected some of these liberal social policies. So they would have felt that the government was getting too involved as a whole in people's day-to-day lives, and not that they didn't want the government to help people out, but that they felt people were responsible for their own decisions, and people should be responsible for taking care of themselves as a whole, individually. The religious right would also, continue with the belief in free enterprise and also a strong foreign policy backed up by a strong military. We have to remember as we've talked about a lot through these last couple units, this is still in the heart of the Cold War. The United States and the Soviet Union still have this tense rivalry between the two, a tense distrust, tense dislike between one another, and this group of people felt that it was important that we have a strong military, that we make ourselves a power in the world, and that we be heavily involved in keeping communism from spreading anywhere and keeping communism from expanding its influence around the world. Now, Reagan, upon being elected in 1980 and inaugurated in 1981, sets out to change, kind of the way economics work, change a lot of things here domestically in the United States. Reagan's big idea is what was termed supply-side economics, but can also be referred to as Reaganomics. Essentially, the belief of Reagan and those who believed in supply-side economics was to reduce taxes first and foremost. The reduction of taxes was probably the biggest push in the supply-side economics mindset. And specifically, you can see up there on the board, the idea was to reduce taxes for wealthy individuals and big businesses more than anything. And we'll get into why that was believed to be important in just a little bit here. Reagan would overall propose a 30% tax decrease across the board. Congress, however, approved only a 25%, I should say, approved a whopping 25% tax cut during his first term. Now, the reason why Reagan and those in favor of supply-side economics felt that taxes should be reduced for the wealthy individuals and big businesses is there was a belief among those people, or among these economists, that by decreasing taxes for wealthy people and for large businesses, these are the people who create jobs. These are the people who help to expand the size of the workforce. And if their taxes were lower, the belief is, by those who believe in supply-side economics, the belief is that that they would take that extra money, invest it back in the job market, and invest it in getting people back to work. And the thought would be then, if more people were working, there would be a larger supply of goods. If there was a larger supply of goods, goods would be cheaper, and if goods were cheaper, people would be able to afford them more, and we can kind of see that cycle repeat itself. Now, what I would like you to do in groups of 2 or 3, and I'd like to have you, just like we did yesterday in class, stand up somewhere, move around the room a little bit, and talk. What do you think about this? Do you agree with supply-side economics? Do you disagree with it? Is it a great plan? Is it a terrible plan? What are your thoughts about it? And then after you've discussed it in your small groups, Mr. Albers, go ahead and lead the group in a class discussion over this topic of Reaganomics. And you can go ahead and pause it here now. Now, when we talk about Reaganomics, there were some goods, and we'll talk about some of the positives behind it, but there are also some challenges that go with the Reaganomics and the policy of the 1980s. Probably the biggest thing is, by decreasing taxes at a 25% level as approved by Congress, less money was being brought into the Treasury, meaning the United States had less money to work with. Now, the idea behind Reaganomics is that decreasing taxes, while it does decrease the amount of money coming into the Treasury in the short run, it brings money back more so in the long run. The effectiveness of this has been argued since the creation really of Reaganomics, and there's not really a definitive answer as far as whether or not lower taxes actually created more jobs and more income. Another challenge of Reaganomics was that Reagan, on top of decreasing taxes, which brought less money in, also greatly increased our military spending. So we were making less money and spending more money as a result of Reagan's policies here in the 1980s. Now, Reagan set out to balance the budget, meaning to get our spending and our income evened out. And his strategy, his belief, was to take money away from domestic programs. You can see down below, welfare benefits were cut, millions of people were removed from food stamps, Medicare benefits were cut, meaning elderly were forced to pay more for health care, and then unemployment compensation was also slightly cut. Now, these were the programs that Reagan believed in cutting. These are programs that are always difficult to challenge, difficult to get rid of, because they are frankly fairly popular. People, when we get benefits, it's human nature to want to keep those benefits. So in the end, Congress and Reagan could never agree to significantly cut any of these programs. While these were all each cut just a little bit, as a whole they largely remained intact, and Reagan was not really able to balance the budget as effective as he would have liked to. Reagan and Congress both believed that it was important to balance the budget, and the idea was created to come up with a balanced budget amendment to add to the Constitution. This is an idea that's still popularized by individuals today, but overall it's been one that Congress has never really been able to get all the way completed, as there are a lot of differing ideas on whether or not the balance should be officially balanced. So as a result of this, the debt that Reagan rang up is pretty large at that time period. Each Reagan budget, as you can see up here, was more than $100 billion in the red, meaning we lost over $100 billion in each of the budgets proposed by Ronald Reagan through the 1980s. A big shift occurs in that for the first time since before World War I, we actually start borrowing more money than we are lending out. If you remember back to World War I, one of the big changes that happens to the United States as a result of World War I is that we emerge as a lending nation, meaning countries were borrowing money from us. But by the 1980s, with our deficits, we were lending money out at a pretty quick rate. Just for an example of the amount of money that we owed overall, you can see in 1994 we were paying $833,000 of interest per minute on the national debt that we have accumulated, and that number has only increased since then. You can see by 2011 that was up to $1 million per minute. Now, Mr. Albers, if I could get you to, when I'm done here, pause and click on the tab for the national debt clock, which is located in the tabs up there, up top once you close out of this screen, and kind of go through the national debt clock as you see it there. Now you can see on this chart, it's a little bit blurry, but you can see the surplus versus deficit the country rang up based on the year. And if you look where my cursor's at now, that would be 1976. So you can see in 1976 the deficit that the United States had rung up was somewhere in that $50 million range. And if you go over here to 1986, kind of at this peak here, is up over $200 billion, where we lost over $250 billion that year, 1956 alone. And that number gets pretty high here towards the end of George Herbert Walker Bush's presidency, and the beginning of Bill Clinton's, up around $300 million. And then the rest of that's kind of projected out, so it's not set as at the time of this. On top of his idea of removing taxes and the government in people's lives, Reagan also believed on deregulation as a whole throughout society. The belief was, and the conservative belief is essentially that the government needs to get out of people's way. Reagan believed that if the government would get out of people's way, the economy would take off again. So for instance, dealing with the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, Reagan encouraged slowing demands for airbags and increased fuel efficiency, which we talked a little bit yesterday with the automobile industry. And this affects, and basically the fuel industry didn't have to meet, the automobile industry didn't have to meet fuel efficiency requirements as they had been told to. The FCC took a hands-off approach towards cable television, where we see, the things shown on cable TV are a little bit more adult, even today, than they are on your CBS, NBC, ABC. And lastly, Congress also began to free the airline industry of regulations, including limiting some safety standards inside of the airline industry. Now, what I'd like you to discuss with someone around you is the impact, and whether you agree or disagree with this as a whole, deregulating safety standards in the automobile industry, in the traffic industry, and those different areas.